part in sport, or because of the behaviours they face once they actually are able to join. And as I said, for me, who's been working in this area, it's still surprising that we are having these conversations today. So in recognition of International Women's Day later this week, we're going to see why this is and what we can do about it. So if we have a look at our program is in 3 parts. Firstly, we are going to look at the policy gap. Secondly, we're going to hear about the research that EWS carried out last year about why women don't feel that they want to take part in sport or can take part in sport. And finally, we've got some examples of good work on the inclusion at the grassroots level. So hopefully the webinar will give each of you, whatever area you're working at, some input into how to make sport and physical activity more inclusive. So our first speaker then is Zorek Abdullahani. And Zorek is a PhD research fellow on gender equality and sport and sustainability at the University of Southeastern Norway. Zorek is a former member of the Iranian ice climbing team, and she's going to talk about the policy implementation gap, particularly looking at the IOC gender equality policies. Zorek, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you and hi to everyone. I hope you start a very lovely day. Let me share my screen. Please let me know if you see my screen.
Yeah, we can.
You see the slides? Yeah. Yes. So this the project that I want to present, a part of it is my PhD project, and I'm supervised by Dr. P.K. Gills and Professor Hans-Erik Ness, and I'm based in University of Southeastern Norway. And we go through social sustainability policies of IOC. So we choose gender equality and human rights. And today I am presenting the gender equality model. And the theoretical framework I used is WPR because we wanted to examine the policy itself. And WPR had 6 questions, and we choose question 1, 2, and 4, meaning that we ask what is the problem of gender equality as it is defined by IOC? Like, in other words, how IOC define the gender equality problem. And question number 2 is that what are the pre-assumptions or assumptions on this given problem representation? And the question number 4 is that what is left unproblematic in this problem representation? And as you might see, this picture at IOC website, it is written that women will make history at Paris 2024. And which is a wonderful statement. And then you go through what is that history, and that is the only equal numbers of women athletes in the Olympics. So what IOC means by making history is only limited to the number of athletes participating in the games. So that raised the question of what is making history and what is gender equality in Olympics really means for IOC. The data set that we use start with Olympic Agenda 2020, and then we went to Gender Equality Review Project, then Olympic Agenda 2020 +5, and Gender Equality and Inclusion Objective, which has been published in December 2021. And then we use the Gender Equality Report and Solidarity Report and the annual report of IOC. And so this was the first, like, a specific gender equality policies for IOC, published in 2018. It has 25 recommendations in 5 different themes. Then we got this gender equality and inclusion objective for 2021 to 2024, and it also has 5 themes that I talk about it later. And we got the report, which was surprisingly, the report said that IOC was successful So when IOC published their report, which was a shock to me at least, it said that out of the 25 recommendations that we have for gender equality, 3 of them is totally achieved, 3 of them has some progress, but then the 19 rest of them has substantial progress and are track. So we went through the report to see how on earth is it possible that with the situation we are observing every day for women in sport all over the world, across Olympic movement, within international federations in countries such as my country, Iran, or international federations, how is it possible that IOC said the project was successful? And when we check the gender equality policies at the first place with the report, we understand that for those objectives that IOC said it is accomplished, they kind of changed the requirement in the policy document. So there was a gap between the policy document and what really happens.
Sorry, your slides are not moving.
It's not moving? Oh. From when? What about now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Did you saw this slide?
No, none of those. We haven't seen those yet.
Okay. Thanks for reminding. This was the data sets. This is the overview of IOC Gender Equality Review Project. As you see, it has 25 recommendations within 5 themes. After this, IOC had a report, and the report said that the project was successful. 3 of these goals is achieved, 3 is work in progress, and 19 are on track, which is kind of different with the observation and the studies of other scholars on gender equality. The next data set is IOC Gender Equality and Inclusion Objective, which published in 2021. And so we went through all of these data sets. So we compare the Gender Equality Review Project with the report. And what was interesting is that when IOC said something is achieved, it is not necessarily what they promised. So for example, for gender equality leadership, they promised that, for example, IOC administration would have a diversity officer, and then that officer is responsible for the implementation of the gender equality policies. And we will have an establishment of IOC managerial working group to coordinate gender equality activity. And with all of this, IOC did none of this. And instead, they have one person who was at charge at IOC Corporate and Sustainable Development. They appoint him again for gender equality inclusion to be the gender equality inclusion lead. And then they hire 2 staff for gender equality. So when we go back to the policy and IOC said this and that objective have been achieved, they kind of change what they promised to what they deliver, and then they call it achieved. To go back to the other aspects, and all of these figures are from IOC website. When they talk about women make history, and then Paris would be something very different and blah, blah. The reality is that this equality in number is only happened for athletes. Rather, for the other group of women in the sport, this is not the same. For example, for broadcasters, you can see like this a small portion of being in Olympics. Press photographers, you can see it for all COG workforce. And as far as you see that the number of athletes keep increasing, this is not the case, for example, for coaches. Like this, the average number of coaches is almost 10% in winter games and 13% in summer games. Or financial wise, for example, only 2 female athletes among 100 top highest paid athletes, or the media representation of women is not equal. And yeah, as I mentioned, about the 10% of female in coaching positions. So again, when IOC talk about all of this achieved, it is not necessarily correct, because then there is like a huge gap between the promises and what is really now stated in the report. So I go back to the question that we asked in WPR, that what is the problem then that all of these differences arise? So according to the data sets that we analyzed, the problem for IOC, the problem is that we should have equal number of high visible women. And these high visible women are athletes and very high rank managers in a sport. And then you can see that for those groups that are very highly visible, there are specific quotas, for example, to guarantee that the number change to be more and more equal, like the number of the athletes participating in Olympics would be equal, for example, in police. For the rest of the women, there is not such an equality or such a quota. So what is happening is that for them, IOC limited its effort to having conferences or seminars or recommending their national Olympic committees or international federations to make some action. For the second question is on what is the assumptions on this representation, is that, first of all, there is a taken for granted narrative that sport is a platform for gender equality. And I think this narrative could be challenged, as Sallie mentioned in the beginning, that if she imagined that we will have this conversation in 2014 and then like 10 years ago. So maybe there is something with the narrative that the sport is a platform for gender equality. Another assumption is that having equal quota for women competing in Olympics lead to gender equality. And that also can be challenged, because simply you came to Olympic and you compete and then you go back home. That doesn't necessarily change or increase the gender equality in your country. As an example, the only Iranian representative at Beijing is now in the Olympic refugee team. Or the only Iranian Olympic medalist in Rio now is in Olympic refugee team, both of them mentioning that they couldn't tolerate the gender unequal environment in a sport in Islamic Republic. So necessarily being in Olympic doesn't lead to anything. And leadership by example within IOC, according to this data set that we analyze, it's kind of the assumption is that if we have more women in leadership position in IOC, then automatically NOC and IFs will follow IOC, which is not again the case. So for example, if IOC hired even 50% women in gender equality in leadership position, it doesn't necessarily mean that the Taliban regime the day after would say, okay, now we want to have 50% in our own managerial positions as well. And then there is this IOC unconditional trust to IFs and NOCs, that it's based on, it's not based on fact, because many of these countries are non-democratic countries and they are not necessarily caring for gender equality or other aspects of social sustainability. And lastly, what is left unproblematic? First of all, the lack of monitoring or tracking system. There is not such a thing that how is it going on really in many of NOCs and IFs, rather than the once a year questionnaire that are the same for every single NOCs. For example, the questions that you ask from Norway is the same question that you ask from Iran, which the cases are so different. Second, the lack of consequences of non-compliance. So for example, IOC has this gender equality review project or objective, and then IOC or IFs and NOC can not comply with it, and there is not so ever consequence for them. Then why should they even bother? The lack of non-Western perspective in defining the gender equality problems. And like the problem that women in Middle East or Africa are facing in sport is so different. The agenda is so different with Europe or North America, but there is not such a thing of having this perspective in IOC policy. And there is no clarity on the role of NOCs other than sending one female athlete or flag bearer to the Olympics. So you cannot find anywhere in IOC policies that, okay, so we have these policies, what is the responsibility of NOC to promote gender equality in their countries? And And the lack of clarity on the role of IOC as an organization other than running its own office, because then you cannot see that what is exactly the responsibility of IOC when it's discuss gender equality issues with IFs and other partners in Olympic movement. And to end my talk today, I want to use IOC quote itself, which they used in their in the prefix of the Gender Equality Review Project at page 4. So it's basically said that the IOC's initiative is not initiated in the response of gender equality problem. Instead, it is to fulfill the IOC's obligation under the Olympic Charter, enhance IOC's positive reputation, and demonstrate corporate social responsibility to IOC commercial partners. And I think that is a very clear picture of why many of these policies fail. Thank you.
Thank you, Zorech. Before I open the floor to questions, I just want to ask you one. Do you think the IOC uses the word problem in relation to women and gender equality? Do they themselves refer it to as a problem?
Actually, I think for IOC, there is not a problem anymore, at least because everything's under progress and it will be making history and everything. So they see it in a very, very positive way. So when you say problem, then you're like, okay, we should really do something for that. And we don't see that in the policies that we analyze.
No, I think it was very clear from your presentation that when they say it's history for equality, gender equality in Paris in 2024, and you've highlighted to us, it's not really a great moment. It's significant in terms of the athletes, but there's all these other issues that have to be addressed that are underpinning their approach. So I'm just going to open the floor now to see if anybody else would like to ask any questions of Zorech's presentation. Anything in the chat room that anybody wants to ask? Okay, so Zorech, what do you think, one thing that the IOC you think is the most important thing they should be doing in order to really address the problem?
I think they should accept that there is a problem.
Yeah.
They should accept that with just having 50% women, 50% men in Olympics, 2 weeks per 4 years doesn't make Olympics gender equal. And also they should acknowledge the fact that many of these athletes coming back to their home countries, they face the same problems, gender equality problems that they were facing before the Olympics. So when you see time-wise and like just say like 4-year Olympic time, you ignore what is happening in all these 4 years but 2 weeks of the Olympics. That is not gonna solve any issue at the end of the day.
So we have a question in the chat room from Liam. Liam, do you want to speak your question, please? Are you there, Liam?
Yes,
Yeah.
hi. Can you hear me?
Hi. Yeah,
Okay.
can. Yeah.
Thank you for this very interesting presentation of yours. I would be interested in, has there been a confrontation with your findings and representatives of the IOC? Thank you.
So it's not published yet, so let's see what will happen after the publication of it. But I present a part of it in another conference with the case study of Iran, and then their understanding was that this is the problem that is happening in Iran, not all over the world. So they basically didn't see that there is a problem happening all over. Rather, they say it was it's the problem of NOC of Iran. And then my question was that, okay, then if this is the problem of one of your affiliatives, because the NOC of each country is IOC's affiliate, then what are you gonna do with that? And there were no answer to that. But yeah, I'm waiting for the publication and see how we could go further, hopefully.
And I think one of the key things, and I think you summarized it in your last slide, is that they seem to think one size fits all. So they're not taking into account the differences amongst their country members.
Yeah.
And I think
Also, they
that's
are very positive, I would say, because I'm living in Norway, and even Norway is not 100% gender equal, and sport is not gender equal, because like the society might be gender equal, but then sport in the society could be male dominant. So I don't know how this I wish I had the positivity that IOC have, but I think the reality is something different.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Katarina Salter says, for once more, very low participation of men in such an event. And this is an indicative. So it's lots of women talking about the problems of women in sport, or the problems of the IOC dealing with women in sport. But yeah, I think you're right, Katerina. We need more male allies. And I know that Liam, who is on the EWS committee, is a very strong male ally. But we do need more male allies to effect the change that we really need.
If I may, Sally, and thank you all, thank you, ENGSO, and thank you everyone for being here today and the kind invitation. This is really important, and I always try to highlight it wherever I am in issues regarding gender equality and to fill in the gender gap in sport, etc., etc. I'm the founder of STFC, the first refugee and migrant women football team in Greece. So I have been in this sport women world for some years now. And this is what I'm trying to remind, first of all, to us women, that the biggest supporters that we should have next to us are the men. There are these very few who stand by our side. And yeah, they're really important allies in this effort of ours. Thank you.
Thank you. Perfectly true. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions for Zohar? Thank you. Thank you
Maybe
very
I can
much.
add one more sentence to this, because I think it is a bit unfair to men what is happening, for example, in Paris, and everyone say, yeah, we have equal number of male athlete to female athlete, and the fact is that IOC decrease the number of men in order to have equal number of male-female participation. So many men that could have in Olympics now don't have their quota, and so instead of raising the number for both genders, IOC kind of bring it down for men. And I think that is also not fair, because when we talk about gender equality, we are not only talking about women, also we are talking about not taking men's opportunity, like most of them should have equal opportunities. That is, yeah, what I want to finish my presentation, and thank you everyone.
Thank you. No, thanks, Zohar. And that's perfectly true. But also the other side of that is it actually then creates resistance from the men, because they see that their world is changing to accommodate. And it doesn't really help when we should be working together to effect the change. Yeah.
It is very.
Angelica, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Sally. Yeah, it's only if maybe your PhD, you focus only on Olympics games, or maybe you focus in Paralympic games, and maybe you have this data, it could be nice to know it.
Yeah, we only focus on IOC Olympic Games, and I have very brief overview on the other articles written on IPC, and like the Paralympic is always less gender equal. So like the more visibility you have, the more chances that there are policies for equality. And like since Olympics is more visible than Paralympics, then there's always less equality in Paralympics, unfortunately. Yeah.
Okay, last chance for any questions, if anybody would like one. Okay, thank you again, Zohar. We look forward to seeing the IOC reaction to your findings when you present them, and hopefully it will effect change.
Thank you, everyone.
Our next speaker is Angelica Sands, but before I introduce her, I thought it might be useful for those of you who do not know about the Equality Within Sport Committee if I just say a few words about the committee and the work. The Equality Within Sport Committee was established in the 1980s, where it was a women with a focus more on women and sport, and the aim then was to help countries address gender equality across Europe. More recently, since ENGSO has taken on the committee, our mission has been to activate and inspire European sports organisations to act on equality in the widest sense, not just gender equality, through active advocacy work, education and awareness training like our sessions today. We're also aiming to strengthen cooperation with other organisations dealing with equality across Europe and to help ENGSO's members themselves. Because we believe that everyone should be able to participate in sport at whatever level they wish to do that. And that only by achieving equality can we actually reach the full potential of sport. So we have a great committee who are working in this area. I can see some of them. Liam is one, and others are on the committee today. And I'd really like to, on the webinar today, and I'd really like to thank them for their help and their hard work in achieving great results. And you're going to hear some of them today about the research that we commissioned Angelica to do so that we could find the actual position, the baseline data for where we are with women and sport. And I think that was the point Zohar made, which is around you need to have baseline data so you can then monitor and see what's going on. So I'll hand over to Angelica. Angelica is a PhD student at the University of Valencia. She is currently researching about sexual and gender diversity in physical education and sport. And as I said, last year, she undertook a survey for us, and we're now going to present the results to you on the participation of women in sport across Europe. Angelica, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally, and thank you for this presentation. I will share my screen. I think it's okay in this moment.
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. So it's very exciting to stay here in this event discussing if women are welcome in sports. So last year, as you say, we conduct this research focused on the participation of women in sport across Europe. We disseminate an online survey, we attend 4 different events and conduct some interviews. But what was interesting about this survey? It was because we try to focus on women and try to adopt an intersectional perspective. Specifically, we taking into account 6 different aspects, the age, the gender identity, sexual orientation, the migrant background, disability, and social status. These enable a deeper look into the life experience of women who belong to the LGBT community or not, because we all of us marginalized by multiple structure of oppression. We collect 487 responses. I would like to show briefly information to identify the main characteristic of the group. We consider all the different groups of age, for example. Regarding the gender identity, we know from the Equality Within Commission that the women are not a homogeneous group. And we can talk around all women as one group, but a very diverse group. For example, the 84% of them identify as a totally woman, while 16% identify themselves as a partially woman. Some people, 11% identify as a transgender woman, and 3% of women identify as intersex. So maybe it would be an amazing to break the binary way that we can see the gender. Regarding sexual orientation, for example, the 66% of our participants were not heterosexual. We have some quantity of women that identify as a migrant. The 8% identify themselves as a woman with disabilities. And for social status, the majority of women work as employees. But of course, specifically when we talk about how they engage in physical activity or sport, of the total of this sample, the 89% considered themselves to have been physically active during the last month. This is nice because we disseminate this survey mainly in sport clubs. So for that reason, we have these numbers. And it's important to highlight the majority of women engage in physical activity 2 or 3 times a week, or others 4 and 6 times. And it's important because the 75% of women in the survey achieve this minimum requirement for the World Health Organization, which means that has very health benefits. But however, we noticed that a low participation rate in specific groups of women, as women with disabilities, older women, transgender women, and migrant women. They engage in sport less than other groups. And we try to compare different groups, if you are transgender, not transgender, of in this case, as you can see in the comparative graph. When we compare people with disabilities and no disabilities, the 10% of women with no disabilities does not engage in physical education. And when we compare with women with disability, this percentage is higher with a 22%. Other thing that we determine the level of sport participation, the information in this case was divided between women who engage in individual activities and those who participate in group activities. As you can see, the participation decreased as the level of the competition increased. So we had in this survey a limited participation of professional athletes. And also we asked about the preference of practice physical activity and sport. The majority of the responses of the women prefer mixed space. It means that both men and women train or maybe compete. However, we ask for other questions like they prefer to practice only with women, they prefer to practice with Flinta group. Flinta is a German acronym that means or stands for anyone who is not a cis man. Others prefer individual, and the others doesn't have or didn't have a preference about it. And we can see that the younger women, transgender women, and women with disabilities, they had a high preference to practice sport and physical activity only with women or maybe in a Flintas group. Other question was about the majority of the people in our survey were athletes, follow those are involved in coordination of management roles, coaches, and with a less percentage, as you can see, as a board member, volunteers, and referees. We have in this study 20% of women that not engage in any role in any sport organization. Also, 2 things is that there was no participation of asexual and queer women in leadership positions, and the smaller percentage of participation in professional sports were transgender women, only 2% of the professional sport athletes, whereas the participation for transgender women increased in informal groups. Okay, other things that we asked in our survey, it was related with a situation of harassment, discrimination, barriers, etc. And we asked for the participants if they had personally experienced some harassment or discrimination while engaged in physical activity and sport in the last 12 months. And the 90% respond yes. So it indicates that nearly 1 out of 5 women face a situation of harassment and discrimination. It doesn't matter if you participate in professional sport club, or if you practice in an LGBT sport club, or maybe you participate in informal groups. All of them experience situation of harassment. This is something that we need to take or to put a lot of attention. For example, or specific, women with disabilities, younger women, transgender women, and bisexual women had the high percentage of women that report this situation of harassment or discrimination. Overall, most participants experience this harassment or discrimination related with their gender identity or expression, or followed by concerns about body appearance, as you can see, 26%, and low performance, 12%, and we have other kinds of discrimination. And other thing very interesting is that we collect information about the type of harassment, and we detect the harassment occurs in different and multiple ways. It's indicated almost all women, the 90%, experience verbal harassment, and including other type of discrimination, such as psychological, physical, cyberbullying, and among others. Other thing, the participants were asked if they had reported these incidents of harassment and discrimination. And as you can see, the 76% of these cases, the incidents were unreported. Only 16% choose to self-report, while 8% of incidents were reported by another person. And something special is in the case of women with disabilities, no one of them report the incidents. So this is some question that what's happened in our sport organization regarding protocols, plans, policies for effective monitoring the situation of gender-based violence. Okay, other things is the barriers in sport. We asked them about it, and we can see the higher the value in this question, the greater the perception of barriers to practice sport. For example, as you can see in green, is the average number of the perceived barriers in sport. And in case of sexual orientation, for example, lesbian, bisexual, queer, and pansexual women perceive more barriers than heterosexual and asexual women, for example. Other questions related, if you feel safe in the sport environment, for example, the majority of people or women respond that sometimes they feel very comfortable or safe. But if we can see the 22% of transgender women did not feel safe in a sport environment. And I'm not talking only about the professional or elite sport. They experience this situation that feel unsafe in LGBT sport clubs, in amateur clubs, and in informal clubs. And this is maybe the reason. Do you think there is a problem with transphobia in sport? The 88% perceive that transphobia exists in all the sport environment. And I put this highlight that it is not only in elite sport. And the 85% state that homophobia still coexists in the sport environment. Other finally question that we asked them, for example, this question was to determine whether the sport organization had an anti-harassment or anti-discrimination policy. And as you can see, we have the same tendency in all the different sport organizations. But in general, 1 in 3 sport organizations had policies, anti-harassment policies, for example. Other question, it was the participants were asked about in the sport organization provide any kind of training about sexual abuse or distribute some materials on how to report it. And as you can see, it can observe that the vast majority, the 65%, indicate that they don't receive any training about it. And the professional clubs and LGBT sport clubs are the sport organizations that less provide these materials, or they provide, or they talk about this problem. And for example, here in Spain, you know, all this problem about sexual harassment and abuse that was with the national football team. But this is something that we don't talk. Other final question, I feel comfortable to be myself. The majority of women say very often and always, but of course, transgender women and intersex women has some responses in the option never and rarely. I feel hypersexualized by others. The majority of people say never or rarely, but the younger women had a lot of responses, like very often and always. And do you think the media covers LGBT women's participation in a sport properly? And of course, it's the same situation that we can corroborate in other studies, as the average of percentage that the media covers women's participation is around 10%. So finally, some recommendations that usually we do, and I finish with this, is that it's very important to adopt an intersectional approach. As you can see, we can treat the women as a whole group. It's not the same experience if I was born in Italy, I am a white woman, and maybe I have disabilities, and it's very different, the reality, if I am a migrant person, I am a transgender woman, and of course we need to focus more in all the spectrum of women that we can be. We can promote women role models as a coaches, board member, leadership position. Yeah, it's important to engage or to address different awareness raising campaigns. Yeah, promote LGBTQ+ participation and women in general in all communication channels, social media, in newsletters, etc. We need to develop a really a diversity, equality, and inclusion training for all the people, for people from board members or leadership position, for coaches, for other athletes, and of course, fans and spectators is really important. Improve facilities in an inclusive way. Promote more women in grassroots sport, and of course, develop opportunities, funding for women in elite sport, in a grassroots sport. And the sport environment need to consider the specific necessities of women with disabilities, women, transgender women, for example, migrant women. And we need to ensure safeguarding report measures and have indicators to measure that the policies, for example, is they are good in our sport organization. So finally, if you want to read in deep this report, you can scan the QR code, and that's all. This report has a great aim to make sport a safe environment for women in Europe, and this is one of the main goals of the Equality Within Commission of ENGSO. I am open for some questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Angelica. So while people are maybe thinking of some questions, maybe I could ask you, when you did your great piece of research, and thank you for that, was there anything that really surprised you in the findings that you were not expecting to perhaps find?
I think that it's really complicated when we have data, for example, about how many cases of the incidents of harassment and discrimination the people report. we noticed that this is not a problem only for the elite sport or professional sport. And this is complicated because for many of women, this is their work space. And we have laws to protect the workers about this situation, but the sport is something like is bleeding about this situation. And there is a similar situation if you participate in LGBT sport clubs. You experience harassment, experience discrimination, but the sport organization don't provide an exactly way that you feel safe or for report your situation. And this create for many women to avoid or to drop out for the physical activity and sport. And I think that has this percentage, 76%, is like a, wow, we need
yeah.
something.
Yeah, I
Real.
was quite surprised at how high that figure was. Zohra, can I bring you in now and say, is the IOC recognizing this as a problem for elite athletes, women athletes, the harassment and
I think what we mean by that, does IOC recognize it as something, is different by what they recognize it as something. So they have their own definition.
right.
And for example, if something happened to you and you want to send a report to IOC, there is a link that you can send the report, but then when you send it, you just receive nothing. So that you don't receive like, this is your code, and then you will be notified afterwards. So you just send it somewhere without any response. So I'm not sure if that really helps, because like let's talk about the mechanism that is really functioning, that has nothing to do with just sending an email to someone, hoping that one of them would read it and respond to it. And then there are major cases of such violations that you don't got any response, like you see in other international, for example, federations, that things are happening. So yeah, in reality, I don't see that through.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any question for Angelica on her presentation? Okay, just wait a few minutes just in case there's any thoughts there.
Yeah, and maybe Sally, the sport organization don't provide a safe space, but you report and you don't receive the support that you hope. And maybe the people is questioning if really this situation of harassment or discrimination appears, or maybe you embed that situation. And for sure, it's impossible and it's very complicated that you experience that situation and you feel comfortable to affront 1, 2, 3 times this bad situation of all the environment. And I think it's lack of take care about yourself, the victim in this case, and maybe to receive a lot of support for the structure of it.
Yeah, I think a lot of organizations have policies and procedures, but sometimes you think they are just written to do a tick box, but never really implemented, which is the point you're making, I think. And obviously it's around safe sport, which is really important for everybody who wishes to participate, but particularly important for women, I think. Okay, if there is no more questions, I'd like to thank Angelica for her interesting presentation. I think we've put somewhere where you can access the full report. It's on the ENGSO website if you want to get it. Zohra has asked a question, Angelica, is there similar studies on other countries that you're aware of?
Yeah. For example, when I research about LGBT issues, but usually we treat the LGBT community as a whole. And we need to separate because it's not the same reality of gay men in different sports and the reality of trans women in sport. And we know for all the athletes that have the opportunity to participate in sport, the women with a very high performance, is only the people that question it if you are a really women. Yeah, and of course, transgender, intersex women experience that. For that reason, in our when we see different surveys about the LGBT community, they treatment as a whole group, and in this case, we try to separate the experience of women, queer women, pansexual women, etc.
Angelica, Kiki has put a question in the chat. In regards to the recommendations presented, what steps do you think are needed to help action these? Great question, Kiki. Thank you.
Yeah. It's a little complicated to decide what is the first step, but I think it's, for example, in professional sport or maybe in national Olympic committee, that because the athletes are our reference, it's important to create equality and participation of them, not only as a said before, not only as an athlete in a leadership position, because it creates other ways to administrate, to manage our LGBT sport organization. Maybe it's important in this recommendation it's very helpful to put more attention in grassroots sport, for example, and maybe to create a specific funding for them, because the gender pay gap is really a huge problem about gender equality issues. And of course, I think that maybe we need to put a lot of focus in not to treatment the women as a whole group. It's important to see the different realities that we confront, and maybe it could be nice to have this, try to put this intersectional perspective in our data, in our studies, and maybe the way that we promote sport for women.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, thank you again, Angelica, and thank you for the great piece of research you did on behalf of EWS. Really appreciate it. And it's given us lots of thoughts and ideas, particularly the point Kiki's just made about where do we go next with it and what do we do. So conscious of time, so we're now going to move on to the final part of our programme today. And what we wanted to do is to give you an example of an EWS project which we've developed to address equality at grassroots sport level. And this is our Change project. And the Change project conducted more research regarding change management and innovation in grassroots sport in Europe. And I'm going to ask Louisa Broms, the project manager, to present the findings from the report. And then we'll move directly on to Tarja Krum, who is sustainability manager at the Swedish Sports Association in Finland. And she's going to present some examples of good practice in clubs and federations and how they have effected change to include more women and girls. And Tarja is also a very committed member of the EWS committee. So hand over then to Louisa. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Really nice being here today, and I will share my screen. Hope you can see my presentation now.
Yep, we can.
Perfect. So as you mentioned, Sally, I'm representing today ENGSO and also the Change project, and I will lead you through and then give you a little background to the project first, and then dig a little bit deeper into the first research findings from this project, and then hand over to you, Tarja, to give some great best practice examples. The Change project, I would love to first mention that the ENGSO is of course not the only partner here. We have a couple of really great partners building this project together. You can see the logos of them here, and also please visit the website of the project to read more about our partners, but also here you can find the results from the project, and there's also a list of the different experts that we have involved throughout the projects. So the background of the Change project actually stems from another project, the CHAMP project, focusing on innovation in grassroots sports. And what we found out in the CHAMP project was actually that, okay, there are a lot of great innovative best practices out in the grassroots sports clubs, but to really build and to develop the grassroots sports sector and to develop the best practices and also develop leadership positions here, we need to also focus on change management within the sports umbrella organizations. So that's what leads us to really the general objective here of the change project. It is all about improving good governance in sports. And of course, it's touching on the subject that we are talking about today, to change things here in leadership positions, but also in the grassroots. So through this project, we're planning that the organized sports movement will be equipped to adopt innovative governance approaches, really tailored for grassroots sports, to build sustainable and innovative ways to tackle present and future challenges. So as you hear, it's quite a broad objective here, and I will lead you through to break the project down a little bit, and of course focus on inclusion the different specific objectives of the project is first, which I will present a little bit more today, to conduct some background research on the grassroots sports movement in Europe in relation to good governance, innovation, and also change management. We will also investigate innovation readiness in the grassroots sports movement. And importantly also, we have actually already built a hub of experts. Tarja is one of our experts here, focusing on digitalization, inclusion, engagement, and sustainability. And the outcome of the project will be an online toolkit, which will be open to everyone to reach out and develop the innovative change management approaches within grassroots sports. And we also would love for this project to be sustainable after we finish it. So that's one of my, as a project manager for this project, I see that that's one of my actually most important jobs here, to make sure that we build something relevant for the grassroots sports sector, but also to make it live on after the project is finished. So we would love to develop a network of change advocates, focusing on, for example, inclusion. So I think this network here, that you all who participate today, I would love for you to engage in the project and to really be a change advocate here. Because we know, as the speakers before me, we need some change here. So the target is really, the main target group of the project is sport federations and confederations in Europe, so the ENGSO members, also the national Olympic committees, but we also would like to see that the future here, so the sport managers and the sport management students more specifically can use the tools that are produced in this project to learn more about change management in grassroots sports. And what we also want to do with the effects here is that we would like to bridging the gap between sport-related research and practice. So in the project consortium, we have both research partners and experts who are out there working in grassroots sports, so they know the sector. And we also would like to have a mutual exchange of information about the different contexts and practice, because we know, as you mentioned here, Sally, one size does not fit all. We know that we need to learn more about the different contexts here, so we need to break it down, and that's also why we have the great expertise in the partnership in the project. But we also are very open to bringing in inspiration and knowledge from outside the sports sector, I have to say. So to be able to change things, to be able to work with change management in grassroots sports, in this project, we believe that we need to look outside of sport to develop things here. And we really want to implement new governance approaches on how to support members towards innovative approaches, because we know it's difficult for the grassroots sports organization to develop these things, because they have their hands full with their everyday practices. And so going to the next slide here, just a short list of the expected results. I can say also that we are finishing the project in probably in the summer of 2025. So we still have room to develop things. So we're only almost halfway. We will produce some final research reports and popular summaries of this to be able to reach out. We also have the hub of experts that I mentioned. Tyres, again, one of our experts. And we also are hosting a number of change workshops. So we are building here a project that is communicated with the target group continuously throughout the process. So we do not want to produce something isolated that we then communicate to groups. We continuously here in this project work together with the target groups to produce something relevant, which will then land in this change handbook toolkit online course. We will see what we name it, but there will be some constructive tools produced throughout this project, which will be offered open online. And we also have, we're also, of course, communicating about the project, both through webinars such as this one, but also we're producing podcasts and other videos, for example. And so coming to the research then, the first part, the background research. So the premises here, like we also discussed a lot today here. So sport can be a strong support for communities like social inclusion, economic, social, environmental challenges, but we need more. So it's actually, the sports are offering a good framework to be able to work with these questions, but we want to see that develop a lot more. And then what we see here, so the issue that the project is built upon, like we all know here, we have declining membership rates. We also have reduced level of physical activity among adolescents and difficulties in recruiting volunteers, limited resources for grassroots sports. And we also have not the least mentioned this inclusion barriers here that we need to work with in grassroots sports. So what we want to see here is or what we see actually is that sport organization really struggles to introduce new, sustainable, inclusive, and innovative ways to work. So what we want to do here is that we see these issues. So I have to say that this project is quite overarching. We want to support this sports system to really support the grassroots to work in new ways here. So gathering data for this first part of research, we have the research partners at Malmö University, the sports science department there. They have used data from a couple of workshops and also literature reviews. And the questions that were posed during these workshops were: what challenges are the grassroots sports movement facing today? And also, are the grassroots sport organization equipped to handle the challenges? Do they have change readiness? So we actually started the research here with investigating further what kind of challenges and then also how ready the sport organizations are to actually get closer to them and work with them. And there were a number of workshops produced by the partners in the project. So here's a list of a couple of the challenges mentioned in the workshops, and we see managerial challenges. So dealing with everyday challenges does not leave space for implementing innovative solutions, although that they're needed. So we know that the grassroots sport clubs are having their hands full dealing with everyday practices. But we also see that sport clubs have increased social responsibility, for example, than inclusion, with some policies across Europe demanding more. And these challenges have become the primary goals needed to be addressed probably by sport clubs. But then again, looking up here in the list, they don't really have time, or they feel that they really don't have time with it. So they cannot use the opportunity to work more innovatively here with, for example, inclusion. And also we see a lack of volunteers. So that's also a big challenge raised throughout these workshops here. So here again, it's the change workshops to collect data. And we, in these workshops, we saw that there were grassroots sport clubs, but also the umbrella organizations, and also researchers. So we have a couple of different groups here developing the data together with us. But I have to mention also that we have one common characteristic here, and that's that they all have experience from grassroots sport clubs. So talking about the first findings here, interestingly, in the workshops, the expert areas in the project, sustainability, digitalization, and inclusion, they were hardly mentioned. So we really saw that the issues that we know are out there, they are not prioritized, because again, I've been mentioning this a couple of times, the organizations, the grassroots sport organizations, they have their handful with the everyday practices. So we need to support them really. The umbrella organizations need to support them to prioritize maybe differently, or making them supporting the grassroots sport organizations to see the benefit of working in new ways, to be able to get closer to these issues. Yes, so as I mentioned before, there are many and varied challenges raised in this research. So what we see in the research is also a number of gaps, and the gaps between the national sports federations and the local sport clubs is the biggest. So we have expectations from the national sports federations, and then what the sport clubs actually have time with, or have the opportunity to work with, because their time is limited and their resources are limited. So talking then about the findings of the research here, we see a number of gaps. So the conclusions here of the first part of the change research is really defining a number of gaps. So number one, we see a gap between what society believes that sport can deliver and what people who run the grassroots sport identifies as its priorities. So this is actually what I mentioned a number of times here, but it's really important to be able to work towards change. We also see that the gap where the differences are between what are identified as wider societal challenges and tangible day-to-day challenges experienced by grassroots sports. So this gap really is quite close to the first one. And number three, we see a gap between strategies and visions developed at the national level, and the need for functional hands-on strategies, solutions, and practices at the grassroots level. So we need to break it down to really support the organizations at the grassroots level. And number four, we see a lack of change readiness in many grassroots sport organizations, and expectations on flexibility and adaptability in today's society. So this is really number four, I would say, is what we will focus on looking forward in the project, looking closer into change management and change readiness here in grassroots sports. And what we see as a priority now in this project is to bridge the gaps, really to equip the grassroots sports for developing and using all type of resources in an efficient and sustainable way, and towards greater inclusion, engagement, and also relevance. So this was a part of the background research here, and I would like to hand over to you, Taya, to give some practical examples, because I've been talking quite widely about what we're producing here in the project. But as I mentioned, Taya is also one of the experts in the inclusion group here in the project. So please, Taya.
Thank you so much, Lovisa. Yes, my name is Tarja Krum, and I work with clubs and with federations in inclusion matters and in equality matters, and for example, in how to, in practical, increase the amount of women and girls in their sports. And I will show you a presentation. This is also based on my I did a master's in 2020, and there I also interviewed some clubs and some federations. So there are also some of these examples are from that point. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay, so just to start with, what has been the starting point for organizations and clubs when they had decided that now they really need to make a change in being more inclusive? And as also Lisa said, usually the starting point has been really tangible, like day-to-day challenges. And I will now focus on the part of lack of women and girls in sports, in their club, in their activities. There are also others, like having dropout among women and girls. We can see it especially in Finland and maybe also in the Nordic countries, that in the teenage years, girls are dropping out. And also lack of women and girls in decision making and leading positions, but also this kind of missing of this kind of empowering and attractive sports environment. But some concrete examples. So this was a club who, as I mentioned, had really challenges with that they didn't have enough girls and women in their activities, and they could see during the years that it just decreased the amount every year. And what they decided to do was to visit schools and kindergartens and also different communities to offer their sports, football activities, and in that kind also a kind of a member recruitment. And even if they offered the activities to all children in the schools and kindergarten and in the communities, they still wanted to really target girls by being really encouraging to them and give them a really nice experience of doing football. What they also recognized was that it was really important for them to highlight and lift up this kind of role models in their activities. So they decided that when these girls would start in their activities in their club, they would also make the older girls role models for them and to be with them in for example, in the trainings and games and encouraging them. Another example is from a federation called a European Gay and Lesbian Sports Federation, who decided to reduce some obstacles because they had also seen that there are much more men taking part in their event, Eurogames, than women. And that's why they decided to do, they had this group of women and they asked their opinions, what could we do to be more inclusive for women? And they discussed several things, and one thing they noticed was, for example, the participation fee, that they could give and discount on participation fee for persons identifying themselves as women. And maybe some of you have noticed this who are following this federation's activities, but they have now for the moment a campaign that is running until the 8th of March to the International Women's Day. So the female participants who are newly registered, they will get a discount of 20 euros. And what they also recognized when they had this group of women and discussing with them, they recognized that the volunteers who are at the games and who are welcoming people to come to the games, they noticed that they had mostly just men there welcoming. So they also thought that they now really need to make a change here and really to put different genders on the volunteers who are welcoming the participants at the games. Another example is a club that I'm working closely with for the moment. They also struggling with the same thing, lack of girls, lack of women, and they really would like to have in their each sports. They are multi-sports clubs, so they want to have in their each sport, they want to have an women's team. So they decided that now they would put effort on increasing girls and women's representation in the communication channels. So they made a communication plan where that the actions in that one also brings up more girls and women in their communication. And there's also a person who is responsible to execute it. But they also hired a photographer to take action pictures from one of their events. So they would have this kind of bank of pictures that they can then use in their communication. And when looking with other clubs and organizations who are struggling with same kind of problems, what they have also noticed the importance of having the role models. For example, inviting older players, as the example I gave you earlier, but also to invite maybe famous female players to the trainings. And I know that the Football Federation in Finland has worked a lot with this kind of a campaign. And also maybe to look really analyze your channels. How do they look? Who is represented, who and who not? Some clubs, they are really counted who is represented and counted like how many times who is represented. And also how are people represented? How are girls and women represented? So when I did my master's, I noticed that 80% of the people I interviewed, they formed their activities according to unwritten rules and norms, which means that they, for example, they had their communication regarding girls and women. It was really in pink colors, or they were like nicely standing, and they were not like active and these kind of action pictures. So also something to take in consideration. This is like also from my master's, when I interviewed some people who had been struggling with the fact that they had these young female athletes who really were great in their sports, but they were quitting, they were going to other clubs, or there was this kind of dropout phenomenon. So here are some examples of what the people have said that I interviewed. For example, that these athletes, they didn't get paid in that club, but they then went to another club where they were paid, so that they felt also in that way more equal when going to another club. Or that another example is from an track and field project leader who said that they are facing the problem that young female athletes are asked when they are turning around 18 to 20, that shouldn't you instead focus on family or education instead of doing these sports, and which caused the dilemma of not being able to do peacefully your sports. So really what was important, what these clubs who have had struggling with this, that they are really trying to hear these athletes. How do they feel appreciated? Really to go have the discussion with them. And for example, what clubs who are faced the fact that, okay, we are not treating equally or our athletes, that really work with kind of a norm awareness by increasing the appreciation towards female athletes, for example, by increasing the visibility in communication channels, giving the same resources, for example, having coaches, having facilities, having like equal economical conditions. Also, another example I want to bring up, this picture is from swamp soccer. It's actually also there's also actually a world championship. So if you want, you can take part in them next year. So, but in sports like this, and I'm sure you also have seen in several other sports, they're really trying to make this kind of steering mechanism in rules by, for example, requiring that there needs to be like all genders represented. So, for example, this one, this rule is taken from the swamp soccer. In the mixed team series, a team must have a minimum of 2 female players on the field at the same time, neither of whom may be the goalkeeper. So this is also a way to really make women and girls more participating in sports and give them also the floor to be there. Lastly, but not least, when I asked the clubs what were the key factors that helped them to success? So one was to being aware of the challenges and obstacles was really essential. For example, being aware of the existing norms that either gave privileges or excluded. So it was really important to be aware of them and really analyze which are the norms in our activities, in our sport. Also the steering norms that I mentioned earlier about, and also to what are the attitudes existing and we need to tackle. Also to trying really bravely just try good practices and also benchmark and see what others are doing. For example, having role models. And also, really, what also was essential for these clubs, that they really did this conscious and planned measures, that they decided that this is what we are going to do. And for example, also thinking about the policies and measures, are they creating a safe space for women and girls? Or really that the decision-making organ is also involved in the measures, that there is always a person who is responsible for executing the measures. It's not like someone, it's a person. And also to take in consideration intersectionality. As Angelica mentioned, we all women are not the same. So, and then lastly, but not least, what I want to finish it, what also came up here earlier, a key thing that the clubs have said and the federation, what has been the key thing that these measures have succeeded has been that men have also been involved and had been the allies. So yes, thank you. There was some of the examples I wanted to share with you.
Thank you very much, Tarja. There's a lot of information there, and I'm conscious we've only got 5 minutes left for the webinar. Does anybody have any questions for Louisa or Tarja that they would like to ask? Zora, you have one? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Louisa, I have a question because you mentioned that these organizations are super busy with their own operation, but my understanding was that they are willing to change. And my question is that, is it really like this, or is it like a kind of also resistance? They don't want to change, not only because they are super busy with the operation. Thank you.
Thank you for your very, very relevant question, Sore. I really agree with you. So the next steps of the research in the project is to investigate further how the change readiness included there, I would say, is also change willingness. So I think your point is very valid. So we don't know. I'm looking at the best practice example that you showed, Tarja. I'm sure there are very many organizations that are willing to change, but there are also organizations not willing to change. So I see that, again, not one size fits all here for solutions. We need to discuss. So what we bring up in the project is also to discuss change readiness and change management at the level where the organizations are at. So thank you for that question and clarification.
Any other questions?
Can I add here, Sally?
Yeah.
I could add here what Louise also said when I've been discussing with clubs and federations. Maybe there is the thought that you should do so huge changes, that it can be small changes, or it can be that something you're already doing, you're just doing it in another way, you're just adding something. So I think there is like the thought that it has to be such a huge change. So that's also something when I've been discussing, it's easier to get the organizations to do the change when starting with small steps.
Great point. Thank you. Every little change. So I think just in terms of concluding the seminar now, the webinar, and thank you all very much for attending, ENGSO's EWS's next steps. This webinar was organised within the framework of the EWS Committee Action Plan on Equality, also the Change project we've heard about, and there's also another project you might be interested in called the Gap Women Project. And this webinar is going to kick off our communication campaign on women's participation in sport under the GAP project. So if you'd like to find out more about what EWS is doing in the light of all the presentations today, please have a look at our website where we'll have the webinar, but also please follow our campaigns and share where you can our work for Stand Up for Equality, for women's equality. So I'd like to say a few words of thanks today to people before we finish. I'd like to thank our speakers, Zorek, Angelina, Louisa, and Taria. You've all given us different perspectives, and I think a lot of things to think about there in working forward and what we do as individuals or as groups of organizations or committees. And we will be shortly coming out and telling you what we will be doing as our next steps on the research. I'd like to thank Polona and the ENGSO Secretariat for helping us. And in the chat room, there's more information on the GAP project as well for you, a link there. I'd like to thank my committee, EWS, again, for all their great work. But most importantly, like to thank everybody who is registered and attended on this webinar today for your interest. And I hope you feel you've all got something that you can take back. And as Taria said, to make a very small change so that we can make sport a more inclusive and welcoming place for everyone. So thank you all very much. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.